Hi, and welcome back to the lesson on L1 and L2 regularization. In this session, we will explore what this method do and take a moment to compare and contrast them. Firstly, um, L1 and L2 regularizations are types uh, of way constraining regularization methods. So they work by forcing all parameters such as weights, biases, feature maps, max pooling layers, and fully connected layers to take smaller values. By reducing the magnitude of these weights, we minimize the impact on the activation function. So this helps prevent overfitting because it ensures that no single filter or parameter dominates the network's behavior when activated. As a result, the model generalizes better to new data. Okay, L1 regularization, or also known as L1 norm or lasso regression, is added to the loss function to impose a penalty on the model's weights. Okay, so let's break down the components of this formula. Okay, so this beta sub j r um, represents the weights in the model, and L1 regularization applies the absolute value of each weight as a penalty. And next is the lambda. Here is the tuning parameter that controls the strength of the penalty. Typically set to a value less than 1. A larger lambda increases the penalty term, effectively encouraging sparsity in the model. Since L1 regularization scales proportionally with the absolute values of the weights, so it helps in feature selection by driving some weights to 0, effectively removing less important features. By incorporating this penalty term into the loss function, so L1 regularization influences the weight updates during training, promoting a simpler and more interpretable model. Let's take a look at L2 regularization. So unlike L1 regularization, which uses the absolute value, L2 applies the square or the squared magnitude of the weights as a penalty. So where um, beta sub j are our weights, represents the model's weights, and the lambda controls the strength of the penalty. And a larger lambda increases the penalty term, enforcing stronger regularization. Since L2 regularization squares the weights before applying a penalty, it places a greater emphasis on larger weights, pushing them towards smaller values while still keeping them non-zero. So these characteristics of L2 regularization helps in preventing overfitting by encouraging smaller, more evenly distributed weights, leading to a more stable and generalizable model. Well, the key difference between L1 and L2 regularization can be understood through their formulas. So L1 regularization shrinks weights by constantly amount toward zero, effectively driving less important feature weights to zero. So these characteristics makes L1 act like a feature selection algorithm, leading to sparse models, something highly desirable in many applications. On the other hand, L2 regularization shrink weights by an amount proportional to their magnitude. Since since L2 involves squaring the weights, it penalizes large weights more heavily while having a smaller impact on smaller weights. As a result, L1 tends to concentrate the weights of the network's weights on a relatively small number of highly important connections, where L2 spreads the weight more evenly across all features. So this demonstrates how both methods functionally different in practice. Okay, so well, let's summarize L1 and L2 regularization. So both L1 and L2 regularization encourage the network to prefer smaller weights by pushing them toward low values. However, large weights are still allowed if they significantly improve the first part of the cost or the loss function. This can be seen as a trade-off between minimizing the original loss function and encouraging smaller weights. Essentially, regularization adds an extra term to the loss function that we need to consider. The degree of this trade-off is controlled by the lambda. A smaller lambda means we prioritize minimizing the original loss function. A large lambda means we put more emphasis on reducing the weight magnitudes. Referring back to the formula, a larger um, a larger lambda increases the impact of regularization, pushing the weights towards small values, while a smaller lambda focuses on focuses more on minimizing the original loss function itself. Okay, so now let's take a look at another regularization technique called dropout. So what is dropout? So dropout is a regularization technique that differs from L1 and L2 regularization. Unlike those methods which modify the loss function, dropout alters the network itself. So it works randomly, dropping out or setting to zero a certain number of nodes in a layer's feature maps during training. So this prevents overfitting by ensuring that the network does not become overly reliant on specific neurons. So now let's take a look at how this algorithm is implemented. So the dropout process illustrated here shows how dropout works during training. So on the left, we have a standard neural network where all nodes are fully connected. So this is our base model structure. During training, dropout randomly select a fraction of nodes, typically half, though this value is adjustable to be temporarily turned off or dropped. So this is a parameter that can be fine-tuned based on the network's needs. When we forward propagate, um, forward propagate mini batch through the network and perform back propagation to compute these gradients. So we do using only the modified network with the dropout nodes removed. So after processing that mini batch, so we store all nodes and then randomly drop another set of nodes for the next mini batch. As a result, different nodes are trained in each cycle and different nodes are turned off, ensuring that no single neuron becomes more overly reliant on specific features. So this helps prevent overfitting and improve generalization. So what effects does dropout have? First, the fraction of nodes drop depends on the dropout rate, which is a hyperparameter we define. A common value is common value on that is um, common value is somewhat 0.3. Let me erase this one. Let me write it back. A common value for the dropout rate is 0.3. Meaning that during each training mini batch, 30% of the nodes are randomly deactivated. So, but how does dropout help improve generalization and reduce overfitting? So it forces the network to learn more robust and reliable features by acting as if we are training a multiple different networks at once. So this prevents the model from relying too heavily on specific neurons, reducing the risk of overfitting. Essentially, dropout improves generalization by ensuring that different parts of the network contribute meaningfully to predictions. However, there's a trade-off for dropout. Somehow, effectively doubles the number of iterations needed to converge. When we talk about convergence, we mean that process of finding a global minimum or at least a good local minimum in the loss function. Since the network constantly changes its structure, training takes longer and requires more computational power, making it a costlier operation. But um, but testing um, but in testing, dropout is no longer applied, meaning all neurons are active. However, to compensate for the missing activations during training, we scale down the activations by a factor of P, where P is the probability of keeping a node during training. This ensures that the model's output remains consistent between training and inference. So it's worth noting that modern deep learning framework like PyTorch and Keras handle this adjustment automatically. So you don't have to worry about implementing it manually. However, understanding how dropout works under the hood is still valuable for building a fine-tuning deep learning models. Okay, so now let's take a look at a very important regularization technique, and that's called data augmentation. So let's take a look at this. All right, so data augmentation is one of the most effective techniques for reducing overfitting in convolutional neural networks or CNNs and other machine learning models. It helps address a common problem, not having enough data or enough variation in our data set. So how does data augmentation achieve this? Well, image datasets naturally lend themselves to augmentation because we can apply various transformations to an image while preserving its key features. For example, as shown here, a single image can be altered in multiple ways: flipping, rotation, blurring, zooming, or adjusting the brightness and contrast, creating a virtually infinite variations from just one original image. So this means that instead of collecting more real-world data, we can generate synthetic diversity in our dataset, making the model more robust and generalizable to unseen data. Well, data augmentation is a technique widely used in computer vision, and it is easily implemented using the libraries in OpenCV, TensorFlow, Keras, and PyTorch. Okay, there are numerous image augmentations or data augmentations that can be applied to a data set, but what do they actually do? Essentially, they enable a neural network to learn from a much wider variety of data. This has several important effects. So first, data augmentation effectively increase the size of the data set by um, by generating various variations of existing images. So most importantly, it helps a convolutional neural network or CNN focus on key features of an image rather than irrelevant variations. As shown in this example, we apply transformations such as rotation, color, shifts, noise addition, blurring, and what else? Even flipping the image upside down. Despite these changes, one thing remains consistent across all augmented images: the orientation and relative position of essential features like the eyes, the nose. So by training all of these augmented images, the CNN learns to identify the most important features that define a particular class rather than being misled by variations in lighting, position, or angle. So this improves the model's robustness and generalization to new unseen images. Okay. Data augmentation in comes in many forms with a variety of techniques available. Both Keras and PyTorch provide in built-in data augmentation functions that make it easy to apply various image transformations. So some common augmentation techniques includes flipping images horizontally or vertically. And next is adjusting the brightness and contrast, rotating images, zooming in, cropping, skew or shear transformations. So these techniques help diversify training data and improve model generalization. With Keras and PyTorch, implementing them in is both simple and convenient. Okay, so here's a bit more on data augmentation. So augmentations are applied only to the training dataset. They do not generate entirely new data, but instead modifying the existing input data. So this is important, no, to keep in mind. In most standard implementations, data augmentation is applied dynamically during training. In PyTorch, for example, um, transformations are defined and passed to the data loader. Each time a mini-match is loaded, a random set of augmentations is applied to the images. The same concept applies with Keras. Through its internal processing, handles mini-batch loading differently. This process ensures that every time the convolutional neural network or CNN sees a batch of images, it encounters slightly different variations. So this effectively expands the dataset without actually increasing its size, helping the model generalize better. Both Keras and PyTorch offer a built-in augmentation functions, but additional libraries such as these augmentations provide a much larger variety, offering near 100 different augmentation techniques, including advanced modern ones. So, augmentation can also be integrated into the PyTorch data loader for more flexible and powerful augmentations. All right, so we have this early stopping. So as I mentioned earlier, this method is a straightforward to understand. Um, this method is a straightforward to when we going to stop our training if in case our training is starting to or the training loss is starting to increase or decrease to reduce overfitting. Okay, so let's talk about the training overtraining problem. During the training process, if we set the number of epochs to um, let's say number of epochs, let's say epochs 100 at some point, maybe around let's say 40, 50, or 60. So we have noticed that the validation loss, um, let's say we have a plot here, and around let's say around 60 epochs, we have noticed that the validation loss stagnates and stop decreasing or even starts increasing. Example for this one. So this is a clear sign of overfitting, meaning the model is learning patterns too specific to the training dataset and not generalizing well to new data. So at this point, continuing training is counterproductive. So it wastes time, computational resources, and of course electricity. So ultimately, contributing to unnecessary energy consumption. Instead, we need a way to stop training at the right moment. So this is where the technique called early stopping comes in. So early stopping allows us to monitor validation loss and halt training once diminishing returns are detected, preventing overfitting and saving resources. So it's a simple yet effective approach to optimize learning performance. Okay, let's talk about how early stopping is implemented. So the diagram here illustrates how a typical trend in validation error and training error. As you can see, the training error in the blue curve continues to decrease because given enough epochs, the model keeps improving on the training dataset. However, the validation error in the red curve behaves differently. It initially decreases, but eventually stops improving and begins to rise. It happens at a critical point, often labeled as K minus P, where validation loss is at its lowest, and K, where the training should ideally stop. Beyond this point, the model starts overfitting, meaning it memorizes the training data instead of generalizing well to new data. This is where early stopping comes in. It helps us determine the optimal moment to halt training before overfitting occurs. So how does it work? So the process is simple. We set a stopping criterion such as checking if the validation loss has not improved for X executive amount of epochs. If the validation loss stops decreasing, so we stop training and save the model weights corresponding to the lowest validation loss. In practice, this can be implemented using a simple conditional loop in your training process, which monitors validation loss and stops training once diminishing returns are detected. This ensures that we keep the best performing model without unnecessary computations. Early stopping is a simple yet effective way to reduce overfitting. It works by stopping training once um, once the validation loss stops improving, preventing the model from memorizing noise in the training dataset. In PyTorch, early stopping can be implemented manually since we have full control over the training loop. As we train the model, as we train the model epoch by epoch, we can monitor the validation loss and stop training when it ceases to decrease. This can be done by writing a simple condition to check if the validation loss remains stagnant or a specific number of for a specific number of epochs. Additionally, PyTorch has a high-level library such as Lightning, which provide built-in support. Um, that is this one, no? PyTorch Lightning. Uh, oops. Where is this one? Okay, we have PyTorch Lightning. So we have these high-level libraries, PyTorch Lightning, which provide built-in support for early stopping, making the implementation even easier. We will explore this in our subject. On the other hand, Keras um, offers a more straightforward approach to early stopping through callbacks. Callbacks allows us to automate various tasks such as saving the best model, stopping training earlier, and more, no? All with minimal effort. So while stopping is a crucial technique, its implementation is quite simple, and both PyTorch and Keras provide efficient way to integrate it into your training process. Okay, so now let's take a look of, at one final regularization technique, the batch normalization. So it's a powerful method, highly effective in practice, but while it can be a bit tricky to fully understand, it's actually quite simple to implement. A bit of a trade-off. Before I explain batch normalization, let's first discuss how common deep learning problems, some common deep learning problems. So training deep learning networks is slow. It requires extensive parameter tuning and numerous small adjustments, a lot of experimentation, and of course, vast amounts of data. Additionally, models are updated layer by layer, moving backward from the output to the input using back propagation. Okay, so this process assumes that the weights adjusted in the previous layer remain fixed. And well, here's a quote from a deep learning book, Deep Learning 2026, for page 317, that a very deep models involve the composition of several functions or layers. The gradient tells how to update each parameter under the assumption that the other layers do not change. In practice, we update all the layers simultaneously. So now this raises an interesting point. If we update all layers simultaneously in practice, does that contradict the assumption made in backpropagation? Is this a fallacy in some sense? So let's explore this further. Okay, so take a look at this diagram. So it's a quick recap of how backpropagation works. As you can see, the process moves from right to left, adjusting parameters layer by layer during training. During training, each layer inputs change as the parameters of the previous layer updated. So this leads to slower training as it requires small learning rates and careful parameter initializations. So we will go through this process again, but for now, this is just a helpful graphical illustration of backpropagation in action. So what is batch normalization? Well, batch normalization, or batch norm for short. So let me write it here. Okay, batch norm. So So it's a technique that helps coordinate the updates of multiple layers in a model. Okay. And it does this by standardizing the activations of the previous layer, rescaling them so they have a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. Okay, so it's here. This effectively scales the output of each layer, ensuring stability during training. Additionally, a batch norm reparameterizes the model to so that some units remain standardized by definition, which helps reduce internal covariate shifts. So now I know this concept can seem a bit complex, but and well, I don't expect you to grasp all of it immediately. However, if you're interested in a deep understanding for this, I recommended reading the paper for batch normalization, um, accelerating deep learning networks by reducing internal covariance shift. So you can find it here, no, in this archive. No? So the authors define internal covariance shift as um, the change in the distribution of neural activations due to the change in network parameters during training. So it might sound a bit confusing at first, but just remember, batch normalization helps. It helps stabilize. It helps stabilize training, no, by standardizing. It will standardizing. So well, no, batch normalization um helps stabilize training by standardizing activations and reducing internal covariant shifts. Well, that's the takeaway here. So let's take a look at how batch normalization is implemented. So recall the the output of a conv layer in a or 4dim or 4 rank tensor. So batch size, feature map times feature map here times channels. Okay, so batch normalization computes the mean. Let me use this one. So the mean and the standard deviation of each input variable in the layer per mini batch and uses this statistics to standardize the activations. In CNN, filter weights are shared, meaning the same filter is applied across all regions of the image. As a result, the mean and the standard deviation are computed per minibatch. Um, Computed per filter per minibatch. So this gives us either three means and standard deviations for let's say RGB images, and one if for grayscale. So this one is for um okay. So for this one is RGB images. So when this gives us either means three means for on and standard deviation, no? Three means and three standard deviations for RGB images and one for a grayscale image. Okay, so here's some advice on how to use batch normalization effectively. So batch norm has been incredibly easy to implement. So it is as simple as adding a batch norm layer in PyTorch. So when using it with dropout, so the recommended order is we have let's say we have a conv layer here, conv1, batch norm, next is relu, then after the activation function relu, use dropout, then the next conditional layer. Okay? So in general, batch norm is the best place between the convolutional layer and the relu as shown here. Okay, so now that we have completed the introduction to regularization, so and you've seen how how effective it can be in reducing overfitting and improving generalization. So let's go over some practical guidelines on when and how to apply it. So let's dive in. And first, it's always a good practice to train your model without regularization first. Why? No? Why? Um, regularization techniques um, or combination of the combination of them can sometimes negatively impact model performance, especially if a bad parameter settings are used. For example, improper regularization can the test set worsen the test set performance instead of improving it. To properly assess the impact of regularization, so it's best to start with a baseline or a baseline model and introduce regularization techniques one by one. Additionally, starting with drop out and batch norm can increase convergence time, slowing down your training and experimentation process. So that is why it is generally not ideal to include include them from the very beginning. Okay. Okay. Next would be okay. So here are some important warnings and tips when using regularization. So for dropout, avoid using it before the final softmax layer. Instead, apply it after a convolutional layers or max pooling layers as previously uh, demonstrated, like the previous examples here. No? So after this one, so we have the convolutional layer, batch norm, relu, then dropout. Okay, let's go back here. Okay. So more epochs needed no? When training When training L2 regularization, dropout, and data augmentations, so you generally need more epochs to achieve the same performance. So always account for this when introducing these methods here. So you need to okay. Now let me okay this one. So if you introduce these techniques, so usually you need more epochs to achieve the same performance. Okay, for the training speed impact, techniques like the data augmentation, dropout, and the batch norm introduce additional computational overhead, so which can slow down the training process. So this slowdown is an important trade-off to consider, and the risk of underfitting, setting your L2 weight penalty too high can lead to underfitting. Be cautious with parameter tuning to avoid degrading the model performance. By carefully managing these regularization techniques, the dropout, batch norm, L2, L1, data augmentation, so you can optimize your training process while balancing performance and efficiency. Okay, so that's all for this part two of the improving models and advancing in design. So we will just have a laboratory exercises here about this topic. So stay tuned and thank you for listening.